All right, guys, let's break down this scandal involving Lauren Chen and her media company Tenet. They are accused of using millions of Russian dollars, well, millions of dollars given by the Russians to pay some high profile conservative commentators. To be clear, Lauren Chen has not been indicted yet. Her husband has not been indicted. The two people who have been indicted so far, the reason why we know about this scandal is because the DOJ released an indictment that the descriptions in the indictment were pretty clear that this is Lauren Chen, her husband, their company, and various different the very few, they don't have, it's not a large company, the very few YouTube commentators that they have working for them. We're going to break down this scandal. First of all, is this just Russiagate 2.0 or 3.0 or 4? I don't even know what round of Russiagate are we on right now. Is this just another Russiagate scandal? Secondly, we're going to answer the question, is what she did bad? Did she do anything wrong? Is this a pro-Israel attack? Lauren Chen had been vocal against Israel. She'd been very much sympathetic towards the plight of the Palestinians. So is this just an attack from the pro-Israel front, trying to get rid of a commentator, trying to take them down, trying to smear them? Or is this a left-wing attack, which would kind of go into that Russiagate, being another Russiagate? So we're going to break all of that down. But let's get into the facts first. Okay, so the indictment rolls out. The only two names listed in the indictment at the moment are these two Russians, fairly young Russians, in their late 20s, early 30s, who work for RT. They, according to the indictment, ran a scheme where, in order to evade the sanctions and the restrictions on RT and on Russian media, they created a slew of shell companies and funneled money through those shell companies to Lauren Chen and her husband. And they then directed them to go and find commentators that would fit the Russian, like whatever the propaganda or whatever the messaging that that's the implication. The implication is that they hired Lauren to go and find commentators that would deliver a pro-Russian message. That's not explicitly stated in the indictment. I don't know if they have evidence that they were specifically saying, we want you to go and find commentators that we could then groom to spew Russian propaganda. I doubt it was done like that, but that's the implication in the indictment. And the implication in the indictment, the accusation, not even just an implication, the accusation in the indictment is that Lauren Chen knew the money was coming from Russians and that she helped cover that up and that she then baited these commentators in. And the implication in the indictment is that these commentators did not know that the money was coming from Russia, but that Lauren Chen and her husband covered it up and they worked alongside these Russians in this scheme to make a lot of money and bring in these commentators. Okay, so let me just show you who Lauren Chen is. You might be familiar with her. So she is a conservative, popular conservative commentator. She also worked for RT for a period of time, writing some articles for them. She did work up until today with, she worked for Blaze Media, which was Glenn Beck's media empire. She also was with TP USA, Turning Point USA, which is a conservative group. They also the Blaze announced that they fired her today from this indictment. The indictment is quite damning, I'm not going to lie. And it also looks like Turning Point USA has distanced themselves from her as well. When you try to find her on their website, you get a 404 error. She's not there. Okay. I got to say now, and the commentators that are involved in this. So Tenet Media was a small media company, just barely started up a couple of years ago. Apparently funded, I mean, the money, where they got their money was from this, maybe this was their sole source of income, is what the indictment seems to indicate, that they didn't really have any other income other than this $10 million that came from the Russians. Let's talk about who the talent. So they, on the roster, it's a very small roster of talent. Dave Rubin is on their roster, received money from this project. Benny Johnson, another one. Both Dave Rubin and Benny Johnson have about 2.5 million subscribers on YouTube. Lauren Southern, another YouTuber, she's got about 770,000 subscribers on YouTube. Tim Pool is another commentator that's caught up in this. He's got about 1.5 million YouTube subscribers. So there's a couple of others. There's Taylor Hansen and also Matt Christensen. They're smaller creators, but Tenet Media is a small media company, small number of creators. tons of money to be able to pay these creators. In fact, in the indictment, um, it looked like that one of the creators, I'm not sure who it was getting about 5 million for the year, demanded $4 to $5 million to make videos for Tenet Media, videos that only on average got 8,000 views. So this was not a money. It's such bad business. You know how much money you would make off of 8,000 views? I don't, like $8, I mean, so to pay millions or hundreds of thousands of dollars to millions of dollars for these videos is kind of an absurd thing. But one of the commentators was claiming, was demanding, according to the indictment, $3 to $4 million. Another one was demanding about $2 million. They were all getting paid a lot of money in order to put out this information that these Russians had hired them to put out, and it's very suspicious. The government, just to be clear, the commentators look to be free and clear of this. That's what they're saying. We don't really know, but the commentators like Tim Pool and Benny Johnson are pretty much coming out and saying, look, we're victims in this. We didn't know where the money was coming from. We're giving voluntary interviews to the FBI. We didn't know. So it's not our fault. Like, we were just doing a job. We just got hired to do a job and we didn't know where the money was coming from. As of right now, Lauren Chen has not been indicted. But Lauren Chen and her husband, I think we're probably going to see some indictments unless they have done a deal and they're striking a deal or something. I think we could probably expect that Lauren Chen and her husband are going to be indicted, and they're going to be facing prison time for this because the indictment is pretty damning. Let's go over some of it. So this is what they're saying happened. They're saying RT, formerly known as Russia Today, is a state-controlled media outlet funded and directed by the government of Russia. After Russia invaded Ukraine in February of 2022, RT was sanctioned, dropped by distributors, and ultimately forced to cease formal operations in the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom and European Union. In response, RT created, in the words of its editor-in-chief, an entire empire of covert projects designed to shape public opinion in Western audiences. One of RT's covert projects, as described herein, is its funding and direction of a Tennessee-based online content creation company, which is Tenet Media. So that's pretty damning right there, saying that, okay, so Russia was trying to skirt the sanctions. They were trying to skirt the fact that they weren't able to broadcast in the United States. So they created this sort of clandestine empire of covert projects. And that means that there's probably more to come. First of all, that means that with the government saying that one of RT's covert projects is described in this indictment, just one of them. So that means they're investigating more, and that we might see more people being indicted, or more entities being indicted for having taken money from the Russians. Now, let me just stop for just a second and talk about whether or not taking money from the Russians in this covert way, using a slew of shell companies, they hid the money because they couldn't get it. Lauren Chen and her husband couldn't get it directly from the Russians directly, so they had to create about 7 or 8 different shell companies in order to funnel the money around. But the indictment shows over and over and over again that Lauren Chen and her husband knew 100% that they were taking money from the Russians. They knew this. There was even a fictional character that was created by these two Russian journalists. We'll just call them Russian journalists, the ones that were paying, or Russian, I guess you could call them Russian assets. You could call them Russian agents. We'll just say they're working for RT. RT is a news organization, so we're going to call them Russian journalists. Okay. Maybe they were working on behest of the Russian government to go and find American journalists to pay in order to spread more of their messages or whatever that might be. But we'll just label them as that for now to give them the benefit of the doubt. So according to this indictment, Lauren knew that these Russian journalists were being paid by Russia. The money was coming from Russia. They knew this. They created the shell accounts. The Russian journalists created a fictional person. When the commentators started questioning where Tenet Media was getting their money, I mean, look, if you're a creator and you're like, yeah, I demand, if you want me to make videos for your company, you have to pay me like an absurd amount of money, $3, $4, $5 million, which is insane to even request. You're requesting that. They're then saying, we want to know where the money comes from. You're going to give me that? Like, you're serious? So then we want to know where the money's coming from. So apparently these two Russians created a fictional person including a press kit on that fictional billionaire who was the backer of Tenet Media, when Lauren Chen and her husband knew very well that it was actually Russia. And let me just say, I think so the FARA Act, they had to register under the FARA Act. They're being charged, the two Russians in this indictment are being charged with not registering under FARA. They are Russian nationals. It doesn't matter. The FARA Act is specific to if you are a foreign government or taking foreign money and you are spreading messages in the United States. Your target audience could be congressional leaders because you're lobbying. Your target audience could be American housewives because you're a media company. As long as if you're taking money from a foreign government and you're spreading messages, whether it be lobbying messages or news media or journalism messages, you have to register under the FARA Act. That's what is required of you, no matter if you're an American or not. They're being indicted for not registering under FARA. Lauren Chen, again, has not been indicted yet. Her husband has not been indicted yet. And if they are, if they will be, I'm not sure what those charges will be. But the other charges against these Russians are the fact that they used shell companies in order to move this money around. So they're being charged also with money laundering. Now let's talk about the FARA Act for a second. And I've railed against this on this show numerous times. And I'm going to again. The FARA Act, I have a specific problem with forcing journalists. I'm not talking about these. I think what happened here, let me be clear. I think what happened here was really wrong. And this is infuriating. I'm pissed off about this case. I'm pissed off because so many of us have had to fight the claims that that we're spreading misinformation from foreign, that we're paid by Russia, we're paid by Iran, or we're paid by Assad. We've had to fight this our entire careers. So it's really infuriating when someone actually did it because it makes us all look bad. Suddenly, everybody could point the finger at all of us and say, yeah, well, what about Tenet Media and Dave Rubin and Tim Pool and Lauren Chen and all of them? And they took all that Russian money, even though most of the creators still, we don't know fully, but as of right now, what we understand is that these creators had no idea the money was coming from Russia. But if they knew, then that would be an even bigger scandal and absolutely outrageous. But the fact that Lauren Chen knew, and then she was bringing these creators in and giving them Russian money, so that then you couldn't even fend off the accusation that you've been paid by Russia or paid by Assad or paid by Iran or paid by Hamas or whatever, right? All the accusations that are often lobbed against us. It's infuriating that this comes out and and if these allegations end up being true, which we'll find out, this has to go to a court of law. These aren't just accusations from mainstream media. This is an indictment. This will go to court. We'll find out. And this is absolutely infuriating that somebody actually went and took money when the rest of us are battling this narrative that we're taking money from foreign actors. Let me just be clear. I don't take any money. My money sources are incredibly transparent. I make my money from YouTube AdSense. I make my money from my locals community. And I'm a Rumble exclusive show. So Rumble gives me an amount of money in order to produce this show daily for you. And Rumble's a Canadian company. Well, and that's it. That's it. And it's transparent. I'm on the Rumble platform. You know exactly what I'm doing and what's going on here. And actually, I think Rumble's now also an American. I'm not really sure if they're technically both, maybe Canadian and American. I have an issue with forcing journalists to register under FARA. All of the people that work for RT have to register. A lot of the people that work for the Chinese outlets have to register. I think that is hypocritical and ridiculous. Why would an RT journalist need to register under the FARA Act when I see they're on RT? I see the logo. I know it means Russia Today. I'm not an idiot. If I watch BBC, I know it's British news. If I'm watching, some Israeli, I know it's Israeli news. I mean, those are obvious. It's coming from obvious sources. These journalists are working for these outlets. I don't think it's fair to call them Russian state-backed media and label them on Twitter like they were for a long time. And if you're not going to do the same thing to the British-backed, the British media affiliations or those that are Canadian or Australian, if you're only going to slap the label on a few and it's arbitrary, that to me is a problem. It should be consistent. Either you make everybody working for a foreign outlet, for a foreign government, taking money from a foreign government. Now, Rumble does not take money from the United States government or the Canadian government. They're maybe a Canadian or an American company, but they're not taking money from the government. But even if you were an outlet taking money from the government, it needs to be consistent where everybody has to register under FARA, whether it's for the Brits or for the Iranians or for the Russians, it doesn't matter, or nobody needs to register if the funding sources are clear. And that is why this, I think, if this indictment ends up to be proven true, Lauren Chen did something wrong. And that is took the money and you weren't upfront about it. When I see the RT label, when I see that logo in the corner, I know I'm watching RT. I know I'm watching Al Jazeera. When I'm watching an Al Jazeera show, I know I'm watching the BBC. When there's a BBC, I know where that money's coming from. I understand that as a viewer. The logo is right there. It's letting me know, plain and clear. But when you take money under the table, essentially, and you put yourself out there without expressing it, I think another consistency is when you think about whether or not something was done wrong here, would it have been wrong if Lauren Chen took the money from Israel and did this? And that answer is yes. None of us would be okay with that. None of us would be okay with creators. In fact, we're very suspicious of creators, right? The hypocrisy of maybe people taking money from AIPAC or Israel-backed sources, pro-Israel-backed sources, and then spreading propaganda or doing without even disclosing it, right? That is a big problem for a lot of us, that we want to know where the money is coming from, and we want you to have to disclose it. So that hypocrisy, in my mind, I view it and I say, look, if I found out that a group of creators had taken money from Israel and they went around and they just smeared all the protesters and they did all of this stuff and they didn't disclose the fact that they took money from Israel, I would have a problem with that. So because of that, I have to have a problem with that happening if it's the Russians or the Chinese or any other group, or even the British or the Australians, any group that decided to nefariously and covertly give money to creators to get them to push certain messages. We should all have a problem with that if we believe in not being hypocrites. In the same vein, I would love to see indictments being drawn up against those who are taking money from Israel. Where are those indictments? Why is it just Lauren Chen and Tenet Media when you know there's probably a slew of other media companies out there paying creators who are absolutely getting their money from pro-Israel backed groups or Israel itself or other pro-Israel groups? And yet, where are those indictments? So the hypocrisy on all of this, those that are defending what Lauren Chen did, I'm seeing this on social media, a lot of people who are always defending RT, they're defending Lauren Chen, saying, oh, this is just Russiagate again. She didn't do anything wrong. This is just Russiagate. These are just journalists doing their jobs. That's not true. That's not how that works. This was clandestine. This was a covert operation. Money was used and it was done in secret, and that is wrong. So there's hypocrisy there. We can't then, and those same people are often the people that are extremely critical of people taking money from Israel. You can't have it both ways just because it's your pet project. We have to be consistent. We have to be consistent in this. So is this another Russiagate? That's a good question. Why now has this come out? These accusations, these allegations could be true. We'll find out in a court of law. It could be that Lauren Chen and her husband get indicted as well. And it could be that this is true, but it's really interesting and suspicious that now is right before the election is when this comes out. I'm sure they'd been investigating this for a while, but they decide to just right before the election so that they could smear a bunch of typically Trump supporting commentators. Lauren Chen was not one of them, actually. She herself was not, but everybody on her network was. So why now is a question that we should ask. It's the same thing with Russell Brand's accusations against him. Maybe they're true, but why did they suddenly come after him at the time when they did? Why the timing is suspicious. That doesn't mean that a person shouldn't be held accountable for their wrongdoing. They should, but the timing is still suspicious. Is what she did bad? If what she did in this indictment, if it's true, yes, this is very bad. You should not be taking money and not disclosing it, that you are being paid by a foreign government. I don't care which foreign government it is. If you're paid by a foreign government to spread messages You should have to disclose that somehow, some way. Is this a pro-Israel attack? Lauren Chen was one of the handful of conservatives. I don't even know if it's a handful. There's a lot of conservatives who are very against what Israel is doing, and now you've got a lot of the pro-Israel crowd really happy about Lauren Chen being taken down. You also have a lot of left-wing, RussiaGate propagators who are extremely happy about this because, they finally gotcha. They finally got them. A group taking money from the Russians. They finally found some. And then when people say, well, but Lauren Chen was actively getting people to not vote for Donald Trump, it kind of throws the Russiagators into a frenzy. They don't know what to think. Well, that was just a a decoy. Everybody else on there was pro-Trump and they were trying to get Trump elected, and that's what Russia's trying to do. And so it doesn't matter if Lauren Chen herself was actually against Trump. The rest of them were for Trump, and that's what they want you to think, is that they want to throw you off by having at least one of them. And maybe that's true. What if that's true? What if the Russians said to Lauren, look, we want a bunch of pro-Trumpers because we really want Trump, but not all of you can be. Make it more realistic if one of you wasn't. Sure, maybe that happened. So maybe Lauren Chen was taking a particular stance because she was paid millions of dollars to. That's possible. She's been fired from the Blaze. She's been, the consequences for Lauren, even if she's not indicted, the consequences have been stark. She's been fired from the Blaze. TP USA, Turning Point USA, has distanced themselves from her. This is not looking very good at all. One big question from this indictment is who's next. I mean, in the indictment, they said this is one of RT's covert projects. Well, if this is one, you know that they're going after others, and that this is really bad. That the indictment very clearly. So one question people have is, did she know the money was from the Russians? Yes. If you read the entire 32-page indictment, it is very clear. Lauren Chen and her husband were fully aware that this money was coming from the Russians. They said that literally over and over. The Russians. We need to invoice the Russians. We have to ask the Russians for our money. Where's the Russian? They knew it was the Russians, but they also knew that they were funneling the money through these various different shell corporations, shell companies that were not based in Russia. I don't know, according to this indictment, if Lauren Chen and her husband knew that the two Russians had created this fake persona who they knew the money was coming from the Russians. So, but there is this fictional person that they created that needed to talk to or interact with the commentators to reel them into this scheme. And it's unclear if Lauren Chen and her husband knew that this person was totally fictitious, or if they just thought he was one of the, another one of the Russians that was just, they were going to use as like the ruse, as the person that was going to pretend. They knew the money wasn't coming from him. That is really clear from this indictment. I'm just kind of looking through my notes on this indictment to see if there's anything I want to share other than this. At the end of the day, again, my consistency on this is journalists should not have to register under FARA if they're working under a logo of a media company. We know the logo. We don't need you to register. You're doing that as an act of humiliation. You're doing it as an act of just hostility, and deterrence for journalists. And that's, in my mind, against democracy and against free speech. So I don't think journalists should have to register under the FARA Act. However, if you are taking money covertly and you're hiding the fact that it's coming from this source and you're not telling anybody, and there's a ruse and people you're getting people involved in, I do think that that's wrong, whether it be Russia that does it or Israel that does it. So I think this is bad. I think this is bad, but it's to me, the most infuriating aspect of this is that this was a group of independent commentators that are caught up on this, and it makes all of us look bad. It makes all of us who are accused of this look bad. We all now have to fight even harder to clear our names from the accusations that we're being paid by foreign entities. And the worst part about it is, they could come knocking. The DOJ could come knocking on all of our doors, digging through our finances, wondering where we got our money, trying to figure out if it came from any nefarious sources. That is something that they could be ramping up and doing more of. And I think that should scare a lot of people. And if this ends up not being true and Lauren Chen is just being the victim of a witch hunt and the government is just going after her, um, this is then that would be extremely scary as well. That's a scary prospect to think that they're just making stuff up and going after people to silence them and shut them up. I have a hard time believing that's totally what's happening here. I think if the government were really doing that, if they were like, well, we're just going to go after anybody to silence, then they would have actually implicated Tim Pool and Dave Rubin and Benny Johnson. They would have implicated them as well, rather than making them sound more like victims in this, like unwitting victims. They would have said, no, they're involved. They're all part of it. And we're trying to take them all down. So this is a bad look. It's infuriating that this happened. It's frustrating. And I think that a lot of people, I think this will be the first of many. I think we're going to see more of this. I do think that there are people, even ones I've been suspicious of, to be honest with you, wondering, and I'll be honest with you, I've been approached at one point to potentially start a project, but the money would, not the way it was framed to me is the money would be coming from, you know, um, places the U.S. government's not really thrilled with, or the money would come from Russia. How would you feel about that? And my answer was a resounding hell no. I am not getting involved, not doing it. I don't take money from any governments. I don't want to be pressured. I don't even take money from independent donors like big billionaire backers. Because even, the one criticism I do have of the commentators that were involved in this is that even if they didn't know the money was coming from Russia, um, it's still, as an independent creator, it's why would you want to take money from a big donor? When you take money from a big donor with an ideologue, they're going to want to push their opinions. They're going to want you to say what they want you to say. And the minute you don't is the minute they say, okay, well then, we're pulling our funding. You end up at the behest of this big donor because you're worried about losing the money from them. From my, the Rumble, as you guys know, we do ads on the show, right? We do ads on Rumble. Well, if an advertiser doesn't like what I have to say, they just stop advertising on the show and we just get another one. But big money donors, you can't just replace them, especially ones that are going to pay you. That's so my criticism of them would be, you should have asked a bit more questions about the money. You should have also thought maybe something's a little too good to be true. And maybe that should have made you a bit suspicious. And maybe you should have said no to that if you couldn't really truly trace the money and where it came from. And they were having a difficult time doing that. According to this indictment, they kept asking about um, this Gregarian, what is his name his name was, the made up person, this Edward Gregarian or whatever name guy that they created. You can't find much about this guy on the internet. You're only getting a flyer from the person that says they're going to give you a couple $1,000,000. I think these guys should have been a lot more critical of that. That's my opinion. They should have been critical. And so if anything, they're just guilty by being stupid. You shouldn't have taken this money. You should have asked more questions. You should have known, or you should have at least been really suspicious, like I have been many times and have rejected that kind of funding. So that's my criticism of that. Let me know what you guys think. Email me, Kim@KimIverson.com. Love to hear from you. What are your thoughts on this entire scandal? All right, guys.